guys, welcome to the show. Today I have a very special guest, Joshua Broome. You may have heard of him. He's an ex-porn star who is now a follower of Christ and a preacher. And he has a new book out called Seven Lies That Will Ruin Your Life. What my journey from porn star to preacher taught me about the truth that sets us free. So we're going to talk about his story and also about his book. So I'm excited to welcome Joshua Broome.
Hey, so glad that this is finally happening.
I am too. I'm glad to have you on. So as I mentioned, I want to get into your story first and go through that, and then get into your book, Seven Lies That Will Ruin Your Life, and get into some of the chapters. It's a really important book. And so let's start with you were born in South Carolina, is that right?
Yeah, so well, born in Charlotte because the town that I lived in, South Carolina, was so small it didn't have a hospital, and we lived right on the state line. So, yeah, grew up in South Carolina, born in North Carolina. But yeah,
And
that's
then
all.
you were raised by a single your mother was 16 when she had you.
Yeah, so got pregnant at 15, had me at 16. So she's got a January birthday. But yeah, pregnant at 15, had me at 16. Super, super, super small town. I graduated with around like 100 people. I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago. We just got a Taco Bell and a McDonald's. Like, but yeah, like super small town. And I think it's important to share that because in that small town, my dad was the same age, and they separately were growing up in that town as young adults, teenagers, but he was not involved in my life. But because of proximity, I could see his life, and even though he wasn't in my life or connected to me, I could see him, and that amplified the feeling of confusion when I was young, but anger and resentment, and really the feelings of inadequacy, because it was almost, seeing what I wanted and needed right in front of me. And to make it worse, as being a young man, he, meets someone else, gets married, has the 2.5 kids with the white picket fence. And my mom and I are living in government housing, and I'm seeing his life, and I'm wondering, why don't I have access to that life, and why don't I have access to him?
So you felt, I mean, obviously you just felt very rejected by your father as a child.
Yeah, I mean, and just knowing how, the frontal, the prefrontal cortex in your mind works, it's like, as a kid, and even as uh a grown adult, it's like when we experience something that we don't understand, the way that our brain is wired, we try to figure out a solution for the conflict that we're experiencing. And for a kid, if there is a problem and I don't have a way to rationalize it, the way that I do that, and the way that most people will do that is, well, I will self blame. It's like, well, if I can't understand why this is happening, I can't understand why he's not choosing to be my father, there must be something wrong with me. So maybe if I become good enough, I will be able to mitigate the deficit in which is in my heart and mind. So maybe if I become a good enough person or a successful enough person, maybe, from an emotional standpoint, I can kind of fill the gap of feeling like I'm not good enough.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking before, and I had a similar experience with my father, although he was there physically, but and he's wonderful. My dad, I mean, he's in heaven right now, so I mean, he doesn't care. But I, because I was the youngest of eight kids, and because my dad was, he was a lawyer, he was super busy. I basically, I don't think I ever got any attention from him or affirmation. Really, I can't, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. And I never he never said things like, I'm proud of you, or, good job, Beck, or, like there was never that kind of a connection, emotional connection with him, that strong bond. And I'll tell you the story that, I was at the store down the street, Air One. I don't know if you
Yeah,
remember
yeah,
Air
yeah.
One, but I go there.
The
I
most
go there.
expensive grocery store in
Yes,
Baltimore.
it is. But I was at Air One like a month ago, and I saw this young couple. They were in their 20s, really adorable couple. The guy, the husband, he's like totally like built and shirtless in Air One with his infant, his baby, strapped to his chest, like skin on skin, with like a big kind of like linen wrap around it, whatever, about around the baby. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like I never got that. And I went up to him and I said, you are gonna have like the happiest child. Like he's gonna be so happy because that attachment is so crucial.
Yeah.
And I never got that attachment, and you didn't. And there was a book called Shame and Attachment Loss, where if you don't get that early attachment to your father and your mother, but also your father, it can lead to all sorts of things. And we'll get into where it led to you, and people obviously know where it led me. But so how did you so you started in, I think when you were 13, you started to kind of sort of prove yourself or get that affirmation by modeling, or tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, so it started with really like being the best student and then being the best athlete. And then, back in the day when there were like, model searches in malls, I got discovered in a mall. And then I started modeling and acting. And it was this like weird thing where acting was my passion, but modeling came easier to me, where I had more success modeling than I did acting. And
Hmm.
it's like, just like being able to like just throw together a comp card, like for the old school people, where it's like you had like your premier headshot on one side, and then you had three action shots on the other side, where it's like a physical copy, your resume that you took around with you. And then maybe you had some of the shots where it's like if you had been published in a magazine, or you'd done runway or whatever, like you had shots from that. But putting a reel together, that was a lot more effort, and then having a monologue memorized, like a lot more effort. So like, I feel like not definitively that's true, but like more often than not, like with acting, it's like, if you had relational equity with someone, and you could land an audition with someone but have some equity, like you would have more eyes on you in that way, where they, even if your performance was good, sometimes you weren't heard. But if they knew who you were because you knew someone, they would
Hmm.
listen to you a little more closely. So I feel like acting was more of a struggle, but modeling, I had a lot of success. But yeah, that was kind of, the first thing where like I'm having success kind of outside of my home, outside of my sphere of influence. And um, that was the dopamine hit that would work for a moment to make me feel like I was good enough, even though, um, it left me like, okay, well, what about the next thing? What about the
Yeah.
next thing?
Well,
Yeah,
then you
that's
made
kind of
the
where it started.
then you made the fatal decision to move to Hollywood.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I was back and forth because it was funny, because I was having more success doing runway. And generally like you would move to New York if runway was kind of your sweet spot. And I was represented by both LA Models and Click in the time that I was there. And Click was bigger in New York, and obviously LA Models like bigger in LA. But for something about LA just had the allure to it. And just like in my mind, if I put myself in closer proximity to like that industry, like I know like modeling is going to be the thing that pays my bills, but maybe because of proximity, and the frequency in which I could audition for other things, I thought that would, kind of hurry things along regarding me having more success in acting. So that's what I chose. And yeah, I mean, it did not take me where I thought it would. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I basically did the same thing. I moved to LA after, I was enrolled in law school, but then decided not to go at the last minute and moved to LA in 1993. and did a ton of commercials, acting in commercials, and so a couple like but it's like uh it's very the whole town is just like it's just kind of yucky. The whole process is kind of yucky.
Yeah.
Um, so eventually you were working in a restaurant and you met some girls at this restaurant, and tell us about that story and how that catapulted you into the
Yeah.
porn industry.
Yeah, so a lot of the models that I worked with, they would, pick up shifts randomly at Saddle Ranch. And it was one of those places, kind of just like if you work for like SBE Group or something like that. It's like the way that you got a job there was with a headshot. It wasn't with a resume. And uh and
Wait, is
and
Saddle Ridge? Where is Saddle Ridge?
so it's in West Hollywood. So it's like on the right before you get to House of Blues.
Okay,
It's like it's
on
pretty
Sunset.
close to like where like the
Oh
Mardi
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Gras.
yeah. Of course, I've been there years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's where like everyone underage goes, because if you order food, you can get in. If you want to get a table, you can get in, but yet the waiters are supposed to give out free shots. But anyway. Anyway, so yeah, like you're working there because a lot of like film producers and a lot of filming happened there. So like the objective in working there wasn't to make money. The objective of working there was to network. And it actually worked well for that. But in this one instance, it was a Friday night. Three girls came in, sat down at my table, and they were headhunters for LA Direct Models, which was the most well-known porn agency in LA at the time. And they were like, "Hey, would you ever consider doing pornography?" And I was like, I don't think so, and it's like you look back and no exposure to any kind of healthy relationship between mom and dad, never had any kind of sex talk, didn't have a biblical foundation of understanding like what sex ought to be or what relationships ought to be or what purity ought to be. And because of that exposure to pornography when I was 13, I saw something that looked like, intimacy and love. So I started trying to replicate what I saw on those pages in my life. And I was living a very promiscuous lifestyle. So, when you don't have a good reason to say no to something, even though it maybe is not best, you might say yes because of curiosity. So I was, invited into, hey, do you want to meet with our agent? Would you be interested in doing pornography? And I was like, well, sure, I'll meet with the guy. Like, what harm could it hurt?
Yeah.
And then I meet with him, and it's I thought like, okay, if it's super sketchy, I'm just gonna bounce. If it's at like in a 7-Eleven, if it's at like in the bathroom of 7-Eleven or something like that. But it was at this very beautiful, studio. So their studio was like to the left. So it's like to the left where like if right to your right was Universal Studios. So it was right to the left of there. And I walk in and there's this English guy sitting there in a three-piece suit with a big fat double Windsor tie and, super intimidating. And he asked me three questions. He asked me, how did I grow up? Which should have been a red flag, but wasn't. What was I
And
doing in LA?
why should that have been a red flag?
Well, just for thinking about a job interview, it's like, hey, what was your family dynamic growing up? I just find it to be like knowing what I know now, like that's a question looking for
A
um
weakness or
a
like some
weakness,
sort
but
of
also like if your objective is to manipulate someone, if there's a clear, missing link in their formation and their
yeah.
foundation, that would be, a green light for the interviewer. But I was like, how did I grow up? Grew up pretty much me and my mom. Why am I in LA? It's like I'm trying to, thrive in this creative space in a lot of ways. And he asked me, what did I hope to accomplish? And I think it was so interesting because I said I wanted to be famous.
Mhm.
And thinking about like famous or rich, where there's no tangible metric attached to it, where it's like, if you attach X amount of dollars to being rich, if you made that money, what you'll find is, there's no metric that will fill the desire of what you thought it would. It's not going to make you feel like you thought it would. And the same thing for being famous. Like, what's the quota for
Yeah.
being famous?
Yeah.
So I think it was so interesting that I said that, because what I probably meant was I wanted to feel seen. I wanted to experience love. I wanted to feel like as if my life mattered. And I thought if I did something great, that I would feel something great. And he
And
was
he
like,
said basically, I'll do that for you. I'll make you rich
yeah,
and
he's
famous.
like, you're a good looking guy. It's like, you've got acting experience. Where at this time in the porn industry, they're parodying like any and everything that has been or is successful. So it's like if you got acting experience, you're a good looking guy, and it's like if you can do the job, yeah, it's like I can make you the guy. You can work as much as you want, and I'll make sure you get all the lead roles because we're the premier agency, and you'll be the guy. You'll be famous. Everyone will know your name, which is so interesting to say that everyone will know your name, because literally his next question was, if we go forward with this, you actually go by a pseudonym. And so instead of actually making my name famous, you actually die to your name and take on a new one, because everyone in the industry goes by a pseudonym.
Right.
So like I think that was just so interesting, saying I will make your name great.
But it's not going to be your
Pause.
name. It's going
Yeah,
to be someone else's
pause.
name.
Yeah,
It's going to be a fake name.
because like something so triggering. It's like, not to fast forward too much. Was like 5 years in, I did this, really legitimate film for HBO. It's like we filmed for several months in HBO, and like, yeah, it was somewhat risque. Probably not for today, but in like 2009, it was. It was like a HBO After Dark film, but I was really proud of, I was the lead, and it was with, no one else like on the cast was from the adult film industry. Like everyone else was not like, there wasn't like A-list actors, but there were like B and C-list actors on the film, but everyone was legitimate. And I was proud of what I did, and I enjoyed, putting that film together. And at the end, it's like I'm signing off on everything, and I'm looking at the credits, and they're using my porn name, and I was like, why would you not use my real name? And they were like, well, this person, like, no one knows who you are.
Wow.
And that was just like, it just it was just like one of those times where it, like, I had a glimmer of hope, I thought, but it actually solidified or kind of reintegrated the negative, feelings towards myself. It's like, no, you actually are who you think you are.
Wow. That's crazy. And so tell us about the kind of the first time with this, because from your book you talk about how you thought, I'll just do this one time and then that'll be it. And, but what happened that first time?
Yeah, where like I thought, I thought I was gonna like go into this room, and someone's gonna hand me like a camcorder, and I was gonna like go like film myself like hooking up with this like smoking hot girl. And I get there, and there's like, it's like a legitimate set. I get there, there's admin at the front, I fill out paperwork, and then, I'm walking by, and there's people like in makeup, and there's catering, and then there's like, you know, assistants all over the place, and then someone's like filming in the background. I see the booms, and like this is when like Kino flows were popular, so there's like this like stadium lighting around this, and like obviously like something's going on, and I'm just like, man, this is not at all what I thought it was going to be. And
It sounds like
this
Boogie Nights, the movie.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And yeah, and this PA comes up to me. He's like, "Hey, I understand this is your first time. Here's a Viagra. If you've never taken one before, I would bite it in half and take half. There's bottled water in the corner. We're gonna need you in about 30 minutes." And so to I share with this, I share this to, just to kind of set the stage. Also, I've not had any conversation with this girl whatsoever. The only knowledge I have of who this girl is on a call sheet. I saw her stage name. And then when I signed paperwork, I signed, black and white, photocopied, you know, her ID, her passport, and her full panel STD and AIDS test. Okay, so like her ID matched her test, names were the same, birthday was the same, and I had to sign that. And then that was the only knowledge I had of who this person was. So I'm like, I'm like in the bathroom, like looking at myself, like, you're an idiot. Why are you here? And then almost like I felt like I was a kid at a sleepover in that, like, I was picked up at a town car and brought there. So for me to leave, I would have had to call the agency back and say, hey, the kid at a sleepover, it's like, you know what, I changed my mind. I want to go home. Because I'm in the middle of, I'm in the middle of the valley somewhere. I'm in like Ventura somewhere, and I think I was in Encino somewhere, but I was at this like random house and I had no idea where I was. So the only way for me to get back to my house was for me to call the agency and say, hey, can you send the town car to come pick me back up? Because I changed my mind. So I'm like, oh, I can't do that. I've gone, that whole lie that the enemy tells you where it's like you've gone too far, so you have to
Yeah.
keep going.
Yeah. So
Um,
you kind of crossed the Rubicon and you were there.
Yeah,
You're
it's like
you're
I've
like,
gone
I'm
too
stuck.
far. Yeah, I've gone too far to go back. So it's like my mentality. It's like, well, if I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it. So I don't bite the pill in half. I take the whole thing. I chug the whole water. And it's like I've never taken, Viagra or any kind of like erectile dysfunction medication before. So it's like my chest is all blotchy and my eyes are bloodshot. And it's just like I'm like out of my mind. I'm just like terrified. And then I walk into this like the director like waves me over with his hand and I walk into this bay of lights. And I don't think for 1 second she ever looked at me. I was just doing what the director told me to do and try like it was never like us being intimate, like one
Yeah.
on one. It was like everything was for the camera, everything was uncomfortable. There was zero connection from her. And actually, anytime we would like make eye contact, she would look away,
Wow.
almost like she was afraid or ashamed to look at me. Um, and that was my first experience. So that from I did everything that director said to do, and then it was over. And then I got like a $500 check, and I went to the bathroom and they only had hand soap in the shower. So tried to wash the feeling and the lube and the grossness off of me, and like I really couldn't. And I remember like so clearly it was like I felt it like in the hair of my legs. And like if you've ever seen Redeeming Love, there's this scene where essentially like she's working at a brothel, she meets a guy, they connect, he's a Christian, he wants to take care of her, they're in a relationship, and then she goes back to the brothel, not because she has to, because like her heart is so content experiencing peace because she doesn't know how to live in peace. So she's almost craving chaos to find comfort. And she goes back and she does the thing that she didn't want to do so that she could feel the feeling that was most normal to her.
Mm-hmm.
And then she does it. And then there's this scene after she does it where she's in this river and she's trying to like scrub the feeling, not
Mm-hmm.
literal filth, but she's trying to scrub the feeling of what she did off of her body with rocks. And man, like that, like from like the beauty of cinematography, like capturing that moment, like I've never seen that scene and not wept, because that is how I felt completely.
Wow.
And at the same time saying I would never do that again. I would never do that again. And after that, that scene was for a very popular studio that just kind of pumps out content, and they were kind of new on the scene because like this is a time, this is 2006, so DVD is still kind of king.
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost like they were utilizing the internet and websites to kind of pump people towards DVD where like the DVD was kind of the compilation of the best of what's on their
Mhm.
websites. And this scene went viral, and they were kind of pushing it out, and it was on the cover of a DVD, and they're making so much of it that it comes out super fast. Like they're just churning it out. So this comes out, and I'm on the cover of this DVD, and all of a sudden this DVD is like selling really well in shops in which sold it, and there's posters of me on this thing, and very quickly people are asking me, "Hey, are you in a porn?" And being from a small town, it only takes one person to know anything about your life, for everyone to know everything about your life. And someone tells someone that tells my uncle, and my uncle tells my mom, and my mom calls me, and in the most probably embarrassed and hurt conversation, because if you asked me before that moment, like who are you,
Mhm.
um, the thing that I was most sure of regarding myself was that I was my mother's son.
Wow.
She was the person that would never let me down. She was the person that never hurt me. She was the person that while we were using food stamps to buy groceries, she would somehow find a way to buy me basketball, shoes, and send me to basketball camp. And I knew that my life was different, but she almost would refuse to let me believe that, because she worked so hard to give me what I didn't have, that I thought that my life was normal. I didn't really realize what how different my life was until I was removed from it.
And so
Um,
what does she say to you on that phone call?
I mean, like a good Southern mama, she chewed me out. She
Was
chewed
she
me.
was she a Christian at this point?
She would. It's interesting because I would say she probably thought she was. She probably thought she was. But it was later on in life where she made a solidified decision. But her parents certainly were. My grandma and grandpa certainly Christians. So grew up, until I was 7, grew up in Christian household, and then that's my mom got married at 7 for like 2 or 3 years to an absolute maniac of a person, and they quickly got divorced. But yeah,
And did your
so
grandparents find out about?
yeah, I mean everyone found out, everyone found out. But we had that conversation. She was upset, but she was more hurt than anything.
Mm,
And like she didn't say don't ever talk to me again. That's not what she said. She was like, "Well, I think you need to come home." Um because not because like you blew it, stay there. No, no, no. You're probably hurt and ashamed of what you did, because I know you're better than that. So I think you should come home. And it's again the way that in your brokenness, the way that you rationalize stuff. What I heard was that because I felt shame, and shame causes you to cover up and isolate, I almost made this scenario in my head where, okay, the narrative was I blew it as being her son, and she's upset with me, so I'm doing her a favor if I now distance myself from her. I
mm.
can't come home, and I can't even be her son. So over time, I stopped answering her calls and returning her text, but she never stopped calling or texting me. But I thought, well, I had lost the ability to be her son. Um, so that conversation went, hey, how being from the South is like how much of your name is used is how much trouble you're in. So Joshua Luke Broome, why did you do this? And I didn't have an answer. I didn't have an answer. I just felt so ashamed. And then it was like that happened, and then in the same week, my manager found out, and they were like, "Hey, I think the world of you, and I think you have all the potential in the world, but I'm sorry, but we can't represent you anymore."
Yeah, you mean you're like legit acting
Yeah,
manager?
my legit manager.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's like, "I'm so sorry," but she's like, I like organizationally, we can't be associated with someone that's being platformed, on like in that industry. So
Mm.
I do wish you the best. And I was like, well, like maybe after some time, or like, could you call someone, or do you think anyone else will represent me? And she was like, maybe, but honestly, probably not. And I tried and I called and I called and I emailed and I emailed and I sent, you know, like MySpace messages and like, I reached out to everyone and just crickets.
Wow.
And then around that same time period, the agent from the porn industry reaches out to me. It's like, hey, that scene is performing so well. I would love to sign you to a long time contract. And what while kind of owes to my book, but it's like, if you believe a lie to be true, it's true to you, and you start to create a narrative in which you create a worldview based on that lie. And even if that lie is not true, you believe as it is true, so you live as if it's truth. And I thought, there's nothing else I can do. So, which was an absolute lie. I was 22 years old, very capable of, picking myself up, dusting myself off. No, I probably couldn't act or model in that time period anymore. But was that the only thing I could do? Certainly not.
Hmm.
Was porn the best option for me to, pursue a career in? Certainly not. But my shame led me to believe, and compromise does this. It's like the easiest place to stay when you've compromised is within the compromise. And in the compromise, that's just going to lead to deeper compromise. So that decision led me to say yes to his offer. And I signed a contract with him. And that led to me staying in that industry for over 6 years and doing over 1,000 movies. And in the industry, kind of, my the narrative that was inside my mind, it changed. And that it went from me like, I want to be the most successful, I want to make the most money, I want to work my way up to directing and writing movies and all this stuff. And I thought, well, again, like creating imaginary metrics that I thought would equate to success, which I thought would equate to happiness. I
Hmm.
thought, well, if I, won performer of the year, or if I made over $1 million, or did all this stuff, I thought all those things would equate to happiness. And after I did everything that I set out to do, and it didn't make me feel like I hoped it would, the anxiety was amplified and the depression was deepened. And I looked at my life and I was like, well, I had everything that I thought if I had, I would be happy. I've got more money than I thought I would ever have. Lots of people know me. I've got tons of followers on social media. Like, clubs in Vegas fly me out to do signings, if in VIP, and do all this stuff. But my life is so empty and hopeless, and no one even knows my real name.
Wow. And so during this whole time, what did you think of God? Was God even on your radar, or what did you even think about God?
I I mean, I don't think I had a I mean, knowing what I know now, um, I I know that there were opportunities for me to lean into inklings of, um, pain or frustration, or just asking myself why. I mean, like back at there, like there's literally 30 times that I can write down scenarios where I should be dead. Like, there's people who I had sex with, like unprotected sex with, who had HIV and died of HIV. There's places where, there were clubs in which there was like a shooting or something, and people died. There was places where people were murdered, and I was there and people died. There were, times where I took, too much of something, and I should have died, and someone there that was with me like got seriously hurt. um, every roommate I ever had while I was in the industry, except one, dead. 35 people that I was close with, several girls that I dated, died of either suicide or overdose. 500 people have died in the last 20 years in the industry. And like sometimes when people think of the industry, they think of the industry through the lens of today, like OnlyFans and like, what pornography is today. Like when I was in the industry, it was predominantly just mainstream porn. So think about a small to medium sized high school where 30% of your friends are dead. Like that was my reality. So simultaneously, my mom is reaching out to me, asking me if I'm okay, and I'm withholding that from her. And of course, she's angry because she's not curious if I'm okay because I'm on a long trip. She's curious if I'm okay because people around me are dying.
Wow.
So I would say like I think the most clear time, like my favorite time to present the gospel, I think, or the most effective time to present the gospel is at a funeral where there is death, like you have to look eternity in the face. And there was so much death in my life. I think it would be impossible for me not to wrestle with something at some point. But the only thing that my mind was filled with was sadness, and I wanted to die. And I mean, I can't think of a time where like I had this moment where I'm like there was this inkling from God, and um I'm like, oh, that was, him trying to reach out to me, or this person
Yeah.
said something and it had to be God. But in retrospect, obviously he was with me protecting me.
Yeah, and I want to get to that in a second, but yeah, again, something similar happened with me. I did a whole episode on this, but you know, I found out that my mother was praying for me. I found this I my sister-in-law found a letter that my mother typed to God.
Yeah.
And one of the prayer points was protect Becket from AIDS.
Yeah.
And I lived with a guy, my boyfriend, I lived with him. He came home one day and he said, we'd lived together for a year. And he came home one day and said, hey, I just got checked on Santa Monica Boulevard. There was like a van or whatever, and I got checked for HIV and I'm positive. I'm like, what? So that was back in when it was this was in 1999, I think. And so that was back in the day when it was still like almost pretty much a death sentence. And
Yeah.
so I was absolutely convinced that I had it as well. Like
Yeah.
I was like, we were both bawling. I was like, how am I going to tell my mom? And then the next day I got tested, and I had to, it was back when you had to wait a week to get the results, and my results were negative. And even the guy at the clinic right here was shocked. He was stunned by it. And now I know that that was my mother's prayer. Like God was
Yeah.
protecting me. Uh
Yeah. That's
so yeah,
awesome.
your grandparents were probably praying for you a
No,
lot.
so not probably. So it's like what again, I don't want to go, I don't want to, miss the beautiful like crescendo of the story. But yes, so fast forward 10 years and I'm preaching at a independent Southern Baptist church where they requested that I use King James. And I was like, not my, translation of choice, but I'll read it, then I'll explain it. And the King James Bible that I had, so both of my grandparents, so my grandmother died during COVID. So in 2020, my grandmother died on a Wednesday. She was battling cancer. She was not well, but in the middle of her being at home, somehow she got COVID, died on Wednesday, and then my grandfather, completely healthy, he died on Sunday. So they
Wow.
died in the same week, and my mom let me know that my grandmother wanted me to have her Bible, and I flipped through it, and there were like pictures of me and like stuff that she had wrote in there, and um, but outside of that, like I didn't use the Bible. I didn't use that Bible to study the Bible or read the Bible. But on this day, I was preaching in this church, so I was, I'm going through it. I'm, setting up my message and I'm marking stuff, and I find this picture of me, and then I look in the side margin, and there's a prayer to me while I'm in LA. And it's not that I would come home. It's not that I would stop doing what I was doing. It was that God would protect me and that I would come to know the person of Jesus Christ and he would save my life.
Praise God. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Um, so what, okay, so you tell us about the turning point. Because you were about to basically commit suicide, and then you had this moment with the bank teller. Tell us of that story.
Yeah. So this was like, the 50th time probably that I'd done this exact scenario where I had, X amount of pills and I was going to take them and, you know, but anyway, I had this all set up and it was so interesting because that time in my life, it's like I had filmed a movie in Atlanta and I was flying back to LAX and like it was just like, okay, like today's the day. Like I can't go on anymore. But at the same time, I needed permission from someone to do the thing that I didn't have the courage to do. And the way that I was going to essentially manipulate this person into, convincing me that I was as bad as I thought I was that I was going to go into a bank. And historically, when I would get paid, I didn't want to hand that check to a person and look them in the eye. I would just do, you know, Dropbox, ATM deposit, anything outside of handing it to a person because on the memo of the check, it was clear what I was being compensated for.
Because it
Because
would
I
have the title of the film or
would
whatever.
have the title of the film, or sometimes directors were just, you know, amazing people and they would write the most grotesque thing that they could think of, just being antagonistic. And but on this day I was like, okay, I'm gonna take this check and I'm gonna hand it to a teller, and then she's going to see what's on the memo and she's gonna nod her head or maybe like, say something under her breath, or maybe best case scenario tell me how disgusting I am to my face, and nothing happens. And I'm just like, come on, react. And I'm freaking out. I'm like sweating. I can feel like, I can feel like the back of my shirt like sticking to me, it's like this cold sweat. I'm like, my hands are like shaking. And as I take the receipt from her and I go to walk away, she kind of like sticks her head around. She was like, Joshua, are you okay? Like, can I, like, Joshua, can I help you? Like, visibly, I was not okay. And she wasn't asking me like, did I want to, check my deposit or something, or check my, account balance. She was asking me, hey, I see a hurting person, and she wanted to know if I was okay. But her saying my name out loud, it was the first time I'd heard my name in over a year because
Your real.
I
So it was the first time you heard your real name in over a year.
yeah, because I'd isolated myself because I had both isolated myself from anyone that would call me Joshua, and I had allowed people like my barber and people that I was living in Sherman Oaks, like by like the like in the Galleria, so I like went to like where that cheesecake factory is and all that stuff. So it's like I would go to that 24-hour fitness, so everyone that I interacted with, they would just call me by my stage name. But when she said my real name, it was like, like I almost woke up to everything that I was numb to. And specifically, I thought of my mom. And I was like, man, my mom would want to know if I was okay or not. And that was my only thought. I was like sobbing and I'm like beelining it to my place. And I called my mom, and she said everything that I didn't think she would. She said that I love you. You'll always be my son. Please come home. You're so much better than the way you're living. And I did.
Wow. Well, bank tellers don't normally ask you how you're doing, like
Yeah.
in a real, concerned way.
Yeah.
So it feels like this might have been an angel or something. I don't know what was
It was,
going on there.
yeah. I mean, it was definitely a moment that kind of like, it was very like in Act 16, like there's this jailer where like Paul and some of the disciples, they've been put in prison and there's an earthquake and these, the jail cells like open up, and then corporal punishment was the expectation, in Roman culture, where this Roman guard had one job to keep people where they were put. and all the doors fly open. He's like, okay, people are going to escape. So, I'm going to take things in my own hand. He grabs a sword and he's going to kill himself. And Paul just simply says to him, like, hey, don't harm yourself. I'm right here. And I think that's what I needed to hear, that you see me. Like, you
So
don't
basically,
see
that interaction at the bank prevented you from going through with
100%,
taking the pills and yeah.
100%. Uh,
Wow.
and it's like, as fast as I could, I called everyone I knew and I was like, hey, I want to sublease my place. It's completely furnished. It has all it has all the tricks, it has all the stuff in it. I'm not going to take anything. I don't want a down payment. I just paid rent. Come the first, please pay, pay the lease is up in 6 months. Live here. Please just pay, they're like, can I find someone just to say yes? Great. Keys under the mat. Let the front desk person, I'll let them know that you'll be coming. And that was good enough for me. So I packed my clothes and I went back to the Carolinas, and I got there, and like I tried to like cover up my life. It's like I covered up my tattoos. I shaved my head. I deleted all of my social media, and I started working at gyms. And I thought, like, okay, I'm just, no one's gonna know who I am. I'm gonna be able to like pretend like that never happened. I'm just gonna, build another life.
Hmm.
And literally day one, it's like, aren't you, such and such? And I was like, crap. Because the reality
Yeah.
was like, it like porn and like because of like HBO and Showtime, like, the avian like awards, like they showed on Showtime. So they're like, you are a famous porn star. What are you doing in Raleigh, North Carolina? Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing? Why are you, mopping bathrooms in a gym? Like, what are you doing? And you know, I wasn't forthcoming with information. I would get found out and I would just kind of deal with the consequences. And I did that for 2 years. But in that time, I was like, found a great mentor, got a bunch of credentials, became a successful trainer, worked my way up. And then kind of the same story where it's like, I met the right people. I knew, the pathway to success. And I found a lot of success in the health and fitness industry, but again, like pretending like I was okay when I wasn't.
Hmm.
Um and that went on for about 2 years. And then I met this girl and she was perfect and I was not. And I was like, hey, um, we met for a run, Easter 9 years ago. And on that, before the run started, I was like, hey, um, I suck. I'm this kid that his daddy didn't want, and every bad thing that I've ever done that I'm most ashamed of, it's one click of a button on the internet for anyone to see. So I'm sure that you don't want anything to do with me. And she was very quickly, she's like, well, are you doing this stuff now? And I'm like, no, I've been out of the industry for 2 years. I'm certainly not doing anything like that now. And she, you know, kind of chewed on that for a minute, let it marinate. And then she got really serious and looked at me and said, I want you to know that you're not defined by the worst thing you've ever done. And you're not defined by the greatest thing you'll ever do. There is one author of you, and it's not you, it's God. Do you know him? And I was like, maybe, I don't know. It's like, I believe God created everything. Sure. Yeah. She's like, well, I've had a relationship with Jesus since I was in the seventh grade. I'm not perfect by any means, but my relationship with him is the foundation through which I live my life. What kind of food do you like? And I was like, you're crazy. Like, what, what are you, what are you talking about? And we just like walked and talked, and she invited me to church. So we walked and talked and we left and we texted throughout the week. And then she invited me to church that next weekend.
Hmm.
And I heard this portion of scripture in Second Samuel chapter 9 where Mephibosheth was, given this beautiful picture of grace from David, where Mephibosheth thought because of his history he was going to be killed. And David said, hey, I'm actually going to restore your land and invite you into my kingdom. And I love how he responds. So Second Samuel chapter 9, verse 8, in spite of David giving him everything that he didn't think he would give him, his response is essentially, "Don't you know who I am?" He referred to himself as a dead dog, and he's like, why would you do this for me? Don't
Mm,
you know who I am? Don't you know what I've done? Don't you know my history? And that's such a beautiful picture of grace. And I hear all that, but I'm with my fellowship. I'm like, yeah, like don't you know what I've done? It's like you know, I hear Romans 3:23, like we've all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. I hear Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. I hear that, but I didn't hear the rest of Romans 6:23. I'm like, I'm guilty. My sins equate to death, separation from God. Yes. But then there's this offer of eternal life through Christ Jesus. And I'm just like, man, that's amazing for whoever that's for. But don't you know what I've done? Don't you know my
mhm,
story? My dad didn't even want me. Like, why would why would Jesus die for me? And then he read Hebrews 12:2. And when he read Hebrews 12:2, there was something about him articulating the joy that was set before him as he
mhm.
approached the cross. And it started to hit me that if he was perfect and he was God, of course he was obedient to the Father, but he had joy in his heart. That meant he had love in his heart for me and love in his heart for each
Yeah, and the
person.
joy, I mean, I love Hebrews 12. And the joy set before him was the joy of having a relationship with you and me and any, anyone else who will come to him. That's the
Yeah.
joy,
Yeah. So
which is
that hit,
crazy.
yeah, that hit me like a ton of bricks and fell on my face. And I stood up with, snot and tears. And um, I surrendered my life to Jesus the
And that
best
was
I
the
knew
so this
how.
was the first time you went to this church?
Yeah. First time.
That's
Yeah.
same thing with me. The first time I go to a church, I get like
Just
I have
level.
this radical encounter with God. And yeah, praise
What
God.
was Yeah, and what's so cool, I mean, a lot of cool things. Like number one, that girl, her name was Hope, and that's my wife. So I've been married to her for 8 years, and we've got four boys.
Oh,
The
four
church,
now?
yeah, four boys. Yeah, yeah. So
I
we
thought it
have
was three. Where did this fourth one come from?
yeah, so we have a 6, 4, 3, and an 8-month-old. Yeah.
Oh my
So he was
goodness.
he was with me at Liberty, and we brought the whole crew up there. And they tried to tear the mansion down, but we had a
They
blast.
tried to, yeah.
Uh,
I love
but
that mansion, by the way, at
oh, it's
Liberty. It's so
so
great.
sick,
I
so
know.
sick.
I didn't want to leave.
Um, I know we stayed for 4 days.
I did. We did too. Yeah, I was there for like 4 days.
Because she said you were the reason that we stayed an extra day because she said, well, Beckett was here and he was like, hey, I think we're gonna stay another day, and I was like, well, you remember that conversation that you told me about Beckett? I think we want to stay one more day.
Did you go to the
um,
Wednesday night prayer meeting thing?
I didn't. So I did combo on Friday. So we got there Thursday, and because I was doing convo at another college on Monday. So we stayed
Okay,
Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But yeah, but
nice.
because I was speaking at College of the Ozarks in Missouri on Monday, but yeah, it was amazing, and yeah, so but that church, so Hope is my wife. That church, Hope Community Church, so the trifecta of hope. So Hope led me to Hope Community Church, where I heard about the hope of Christ. So,
I love
but I
that.
mean, what's so cool about it is like God redeems, like all of it. Like Romans 8:28, like all means all. So the same personality that led me to, being a perfectionist in a lot of like areas of my life, and the same personality that allowed me to be a good actor because I could, recall and reciprocate words and emotions and stuff like that. I had a good work ethic. Um, and some of the things that led me to do good things so that I would feel like I was a good person, like some of those behaviors, surrendered and submitted to the person of Jesus. I was like, okay, if I'm going to follow Jesus, I want to do it to the best of my ability. So 3 days after I give my life to Christ, I go to this church and I'm like, hey, I've got a story I want to share with you, and I really want to learn how to read the Bible. and they heard my story and they were like, holy smokes, man, like we got to get you like connected with someone. And this guy Andrew, he was going to say, hey, here's a Bible, get plugged into a small group, read John, best of luck. But he felt convicted by the Holy Spirit. He's like, man, I need to spend some time with this guy. And he spent far more time with me that he thought he was going to, because he's like, my office is open. I was like, you don't know who you're talking to. And we ended up spending like 10 to 15 hours a week for several years. And they actually ended up starting, what became like an internship program, like out of some of the stuff we did, because he was a phenomenal teacher of the Bible. He was a DTS guy. And, we started going through some stuff, and it's like we went from, just basic, like, observation, interpretation, application to, a year later, he's like walking me through like, Bill Mounts. It's like we're going through like basic biblical Greek, and like
Yeah.
we're doing all this stuff. And then eventually I went to Liberty, and that's where, all of my education is from Liberty. Most of it's online, but ended up doing that. But yeah, like became a student of the Bible, fell in love with the Bible, and everything that made me good at things that were not good allowed me to be effective regarding being a minister of that word of reconciliation, of being, a podcaster, a preacher, whatever it was. um, it was just an amazing journey. And then about 3 years ago, in the middle of me doing, so I was on staff at a church in Oklahoma, and then I was on staff at a church in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And then in the middle of that, Tucker Carlson calls me and he's like, hey, would you like to be on my show? And I was like, sure. And he's like, how'd you go from being, this is when he's like prime time on Fox. So it's like it's like, how did you go from, being, the most successful porn star in America in 2012 to, teaching the Bible? Like, how does that happen? I was like, man, I'm so glad you asked. And I walked him through the gospel,
I
and
love
they
it.
did, they didn't cut it, and they let it fly 22 minutes, like, 4.2 million people on Fox. And like from that moment, like my life has been different. Just endless, opportunities to do cool stuff. But I love that God, like, that was, 6 years after I've given my life to Christ, went through significant counseling, significant discipleship, significant healing, and sat in a place where like God healed me and protected me to the extent where I could talk about difficult things that help people. And that's my hope every time that I do a podcast or step on a platform, is that I make much of Jesus Christ. And anything that I share about my past, it's like, man, I didn't allow my past to own me. And the way that I choose to own it is that I put it at the foot of the cross, and I was willing to share my brokenness with other people so that I could, understanding my personality as an external processor, I can talk through things and see essentially landmines in my life that I maybe would not have stepped on if I would have known better. But in spite of all that, in spite of, me doing things I ought not do, and me um, living my life in a way that I'm like, man, I wish I would have turned left when I turned right. God has used all of it. So would I change anything? No, I wouldn't change anything about my life in any way, no matter how dark, no matter how hurtful, um, because God has used all of it. And I would not concede anything that I have today. Um, I would gladly go through it again.
Amen to that. So we're actually running out of time, but I want to talk briefly about the book, Seven Lies That Will Ruin Your Life. Kind of just give us an overview of what, because I mean, I had very specific questions, but I don't think we have time. But just give us kind of an overview of what led you to write this, and what are those seven lies?
Yeah, I mean, what led me to write it was I think like Most people wanted me to write, and I thought I was going to write a book about either pornography or like here's a memoir.
Hmm.
But instead, it's glimpses into aspects of my life and glimpses into other people's lives where you've believed a lie to be true that was from culture. And then through the belief and understanding of what is actually true from scripture, when you apply truth to a lie, something has to be eradicated. So, Second Timothy 3:16, talks about, all scriptures, God breathed and good for teaching, rebuke and reproof, and just that idea of reproof, where there had to be this dismantling and destroying of one thing so that there could be a better thing built, so you could stand on something that's sturdy. So that's it. It's like big cultural lies that are disproven. But if you, it's one thing to disprove something, but if you got to replace a habit with a habit, and you have to replace a thought with a thought, so it's replacing a lie from culture with a truth from God, and how that lie cost me deeply, but how that lie both healed me and changed the way that I thought. So around like big thoughts like purpose, that that you could be your own God. I love the story in Exodus 32 where essentially Moses is up on the mountain getting the 10 commandments, and Aaron and his misfits are down there like building this golden calf. And they refer to the golden calf in two ways. They call the golden calf Elohim, which means
Hmm.
a God, but then they call the golden calf Yahweh, the one in which delivered them out of Egypt. And it's just this idea of, man, if you take your preconceived notions of your preferences and your hurt and your pain, and you put that in the bucket of your belief, the God in which you say you're serving is a man-made God, and a man-made God is not going to be able to help you or save you, because Jesus plus anything is not Jesus at all. And it's just this desire that came from the garden where we want to maintain autonomy over some area of our life. So maybe Jesus is Lord over 90% of our life, but there's this 10% that we want to self govern, we want to protect. It's too dark, it's too broken, it's too important to me. I don't want to let it go. And that's the part of you is in which that probably causes you a lot of pain. And actually, that's the place in which God wants to heal you so that he can use that part to be the most effective. So that's the John 10:10, that the enemy wants to steal, kill, and destroy, but Jesus wants to give you abundant life. That abundant life is found in the surrender of the 10% that you don't want to let go of. So
Mm.
that, and the last two, imitation intimacy and hijacked healing, those are big. Where we live in a world that's inundated with pornography, and average age of consumption's 8 years old, makes more money than the NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball all combined. 35% of all the data transferred on the internet on a daily basis is pornography. It's shifting culture. 50% of marriages that end in divorce in America, pornography is the primary catalyst for that. Consumption since 2016 has gone up for both men and women 400%. So it's something that's changing the demographic of our world. So I say all that to say, if we believe that intimacy is found in the bucket of sex, we're so wrong. Sex exists in the bucket of intimacy, but intimacy is proximity to God. And until you understand that intimacy is found in proximity to God, and allow Him to love you and you love Him back, and then see love through the lens in which He, the author of all things, said this is what love is, then you're going to fall short from your idea of love, because
Mm.
everything else is just a counterfeit, and it's going to leave you empty and hopeless and looking for something else. And then, the last one, hijacked healing, it's just this idea of counterfeit culture where you blew it. You can't become something or have something because you did something.
You mean cancel culture, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Cancel culture. Yeah, just like you do this one thing, and you're done for. And
Which is
we
anti-gospel, which is the
yeah,
opposite of the gospel.
yeah, it's antithetical to everything that Jesus says. He literally is offering the gospel as the antidote for death. So if it's the antidote for death, it can most certainly resurrect us from our gravest mistakes. But for me, like the way that landed was me believing that I can't forgive my dad because I was afraid that reconciliation wasn't going to meet my expectations. So if reconciliation isn't going to meet your expectations, you often withhold the extension of forgiveness, because why would you forgive if nothing's going to change? And the answer to that is you're called to forgive because you've been forgiven. That doesn't mean that you don't set boundaries,
Hmm.
but the reality is the only person that you hurt when you don't extend forgiveness is you. So for me, with my dad, like that was a big part of that, and that was the reason that I wanted to end my book with that, because what I found was when I removed myself from the lustful thoughts and the the sexual morality and all this stuff, I still found myself angry, and I didn't understand why. And it was because at the end of the day, I believed that if my dad would have been there, I wouldn't have done the things that led to the way
Hmm.
my life looked. And like, sure, like it contributed to, like, that trauma contributed to the way that I saw myself, but I still have free will. And it was upon my own volition I made those decisions. So forgiving him and taking ownership of my sin being done by me provided me with so much healing. And I was
And
so,
especially when you met your firstborn son, that
yeah,
that provided a lot of healing. Am I
yeah,
right?
100%. I remember when he was born, I walk up to him and put my hand out, and he grabs my finger, and I hear God say to me, "I love you more than that." The feeling that I'm looking at him and I would die for him. I'd do anything for him. I can't even imagine, never having a father. I can't believe like I'm a father in that moment. Like how, like what am I gonna do? Am I gonna hurt him? Am I gonna, and the love that I felt in my heart, God reminded me that I love you so much more than the love you feel for him.
Wow.
Um, so that's why we named him Canon. So Canon in Hebrew means measuring stick. So for us, he's like the measure of God's grace. Um, you know, the unmerited favor that I don't deserve.
Wow. I have a friend actually whose son, he named his son Cannon, which is, I love that name. Um, wow. Well, guys, the book is Seven Lies That Will Ruin Your Life. What my journey from porn star to preacher taught me about the truth that sets us free. Joshua, tell people how they can get in touch with you, or what you're doing now. Um,
Yeah. So the best way to get in touch with me is either my website. My website is joshuabroome.me. There's an E on my last name. So like the cleaning apparatus plus an E at the end. So joshuabroome.me.
we'll
And my
link to that
social
below. Yeah.
Yeah, and then my social media across the board is I am Joshua Broome. And yeah, so I mean, I am part of a content creation studio called Compel Media. We tell compelling stories, like Unmentionable. We did a documentary style podcast called Unmentionable, and we track my story chronologically, and we track the growth of the porn industry from sexual ethic in Corinth and Ephesus to what's happening in DC, and some of my efforts lobbying for legislation and doing some stuff like that. But just a really broad, deep dive into the depth of pornography. So I think it's a really great resource for someone, because we interview historian, church experts, people working on legislation, people who've been impacted by it, people who are for it. But it's called Unmentionable. You can find it anywhere you can listen to podcasts. So we do that, and I travel and preach at churches and events all over the world. And yeah, so that's what I get to do. And we live in Dallas with my wife Hope and our 4 kids, and just love the sweet season we're in.
I love it. Only God can do these things. Only God.
Yeah,
Well, thank you, Joshua, so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
absolutely. It's my joy.
All right, guys, we will see you next time. Thank you.